And thank you for tuning back in for our semifinal results for our top 8 debate on IP games based on novels.
It's
We had
Fantasy Flight versus Fantasy Flight.
It is Fantasy Flight versus Fantasy Flight. All three of the non-Fantasy Flight games got knocked off the list. Our final ones going now into our semifinals are Eldritch Horror,
Versus the 3 seed Game of Thrones, the board game.
Arkham Horror,
Versus the 2 seed Lord of the Rings, Journey to Middle-earth. So our top 2 seeds, actually our top 3 seeds are still in it. Compared to last week, when
yeah,
our top 3 seeds were eliminated by this point.
right, exactly. So we have right now, and this is gonna be obvious which one we're gonna pick to argue for. We have Eldritch Horror versus Game of Thrones, the board game. And this, I feel like this is gonna be closer than at first thought.
People think, and in fact, we might have to go to the tiebreaker. So I'm going to pull the poll up real quick
Right.
here.
Yeah, exactly. So with that being said, I'm gonna assume you're gonna take Eldritch Horror.
Sure, I will.
All right. So why don't you lead us off then?
All right. So for Eldritch Horror, again, if people are familiar with the H.P. Lovecraft IP, it comes out. Like there's no tomorrow. You are fighting like a big bad. You're trying to make sure the cultists don't bring this guy or whoever it is. And let's just go with Cthulhu because everybody knows Cthulhu. You're trying to make sure the cultists don't bring Cthulhu to life because else we're screwed. And then so it's and the thing is the argument for replayability against both these games are a wash. They're long games. There's no if ands and buts about it. And the reason why I think Eldritch Horror is better at that is because it's co-op. I get to make choices that I can talk through with my team. Okay, I'm going to go over here and try to get this special thing that's in Antarctica because we're probably going to need whatever it is to help us out. So why don't you go over there since you're a tank and go fight this guy over here? And so that's the reason why I really like Eldritch Horror over Game of Thrones. And the fact of the matter is, for me personally, Eldritch Horror is easier to get to the table because the co-op capabilities of it compared to Game of Thrones. I know a lot of people who don't like backstabby type of games, and Game of Thrones is a very backstabby game.
Well, I mean that comes through with the subject matter, you know.
Yeah, and no, and I get it. I've read the first book. I haven't read the whole series. My wife is in love with the series, and she's mad at George R. R. Martin for not finishing it. And I've read 2, 3, maybe 4 of the stories of about 4 because I did in Innsmouth as well. So but the lore. So I'm just gonna go again once based on our brackets here. IP theme comes out amazingly in this game for Eldritch Horror, more so than some of the other Arkham Horror games, because it is a world romp where you're going after and trying to make sure the cultists don't bring this guy to life. Meaningful choices. You do have a lot of meaningful choices, especially when it comes to table talk. You're like, okay, if I go do this, someone needs to make sure this is set up. If you want me to go do this needs to get taken care of because I'm over here taking care of it. But if you're saying since I'm the closest and I need to go over here, someone needs to come over here and clean up this mess that I was dealing with. There is a little bit of luck, of course, with the dice rolls. There is some mitigation with it between the blessed, but it's also a disadvantage too if you get cursed, which is an interesting aspect of it. Art and production, again, a wash. But the game is just amazingly beautiful. Replayability, I probably get more people to play this one than Game of Thrones, just again because of the co-op mechanism. In ease of play, this is going to be a wash again. Neither one of them are really easy to play. I just think Eldritch Horror would be easier to play because the actions are easier to grasp.
Okay. I can definitely understand those. Yeah. So as for Game of Thrones, the biggest highlight is how well it matches the theme. I mean, because everything that happened as far as the series and the books, on how there were alignments based on people who fell in love with each other, alignments based on uh, alliances that were made between forced marriages or just like you've stood by my house for years, like you can't betray us now. The manipulation with the bankers, I forget what they are, but they how they can control things with money and how other people rely on them, and then stopping resources. It as far as matching the theme, Eldritch Horror, yes, it's an overall story of we are investigators trying to stop cultists from raising the Elder God. Okay, cool. It doesn't matter where it's set because it's that same story. It's like, oh crap, it's no longer in the city, it's the whole world. Uh-oh. But really, Game of Thrones is you are fighting over that map, you are controlling those regions, you are building your forces, you are actively negotiating and setting alignments with your opponents. There, it's unparalleled. It's not even comparable. This definitely matches the theme more. As far as meaningful choices, there is no random in this game. You don't have random in Game of Thrones. Everything is laid out as far as discussion, and every action that every player puts down as far as what discs and what actions they take, that is set in stone. It is not a variable. You if you betray somebody and you put down an attack token versus their alignment token or whatever, you take them over because you catch them off guard. There is no random, whereas the Eldritch Horror does have that random with the dice and the cards, and I mean, granted, it's a puzzle you have to solve, but it doesn't give you the meaningful choices. You have to respond to it bad or respond to it. Whereas in Game of Thrones, you really do feel like you're the head of one of the houses, using your forces for your gain. there's there's enough of that. And then art and production, I do agree, it's a wash. If I was forced to pick one of them, I would say Game of Thrones. Barely, and barely, and that's because, man, I would pick Game of Thrones just barely because of the fact of all of the art and all of the art and graphic design is the exact same. Like it's good in both ends, but the pieces in Game of Thrones, those little plastic ships, all the pieces, the war pieces, I personally like them just a little bit better than the punchboard standees that you have for some of the other
See,
stuff.
I really
It
like Eldritch Horror's art production value, though.
Yeah, it's
Honestly, I would give
good.
it to that one just because it's there's so much that you get. Especially, you got to think about it. Game of Thrones Second Edition, is it Second Edition?
Second
Yeah, it's the
edition.
one we're talking about right now. Um, it came out in the later 2000s when the TV show came out, so it got more popular. So they gave it better production. Eldritch Horror was one of the earlier games for Fantasy Flight, probably a few years after Arkham Horror. So the production wasn't top notch where it is where you expect Fantasy Flight now. But for
Right.
what it is, it's got some really good pieces.
Yeah, it really does. Replayability, I agree with you. It is easier to get a co-op game to solve the puzzle together than one where we're really gonna like destroy each
Backstab,
other.
yeah.
Yeah. And then as ease of play, same thing. I feel like the co-op nature of it is easier to play than a heavy negotiation game. Now, if that's what you're into at the time and that's what you want to play, then obviously Game of Thrones is going to beat Eldritch Horror.
So
But as far as
if
getting
I
it to the
gave you
table,
how you argued, and I will, IP, theme, and meaningful choices, Game of Thrones.
yeah,
Wash on arts and production, because we
yep,
both disagree on that one.
agreed.
Replayability and ease of play, go to Eldritch Horror, which means we have to go to Tiebreaker.
That's right. So, based on our votes on Facebook, which one
It
ranks higher?
is Eldritch Horror. It has 4, and Game of Thrones, the board game, has 2. So 4-2.
For the
Oh,
two,
wait, sorry, yep. Eldritch Horror moves on.
Eldritch Horror moves on. All right, that's fair.
It was a
I
close vote, too, 4-2, so.
Yeah, it's a very close vote. And I
But
mean,
I
really,
think
they're both
along
great.
has to go with the fact that it's co-op.
Yeah, yeah, that really gets people into the theme. Whereas, like, I mean, Game of Thrones, it really does bring it out. Like,
Yeah, yeah.
that's what makes it so meaningful in that is that it brings it out really well. And I've only played one other game that's set in Game of Thrones that has a more thematic uh, feel to it, and that's the Iron Throne. And that's because Cosmic Encounter was based off of
Yeah.
that
So,
negotiation and the shenanigans.
so yeah, I get it. Don't get me wrong. I would have picked Eldritch Horror personally myself.
Yeah.
Just because, again, it's easier to get to the table. I have all the big box box expansions except for the most recent one because it's just cards.
Yeah.
And I don't know if I want to spend $40 for just cards.
Right.
Whereas like the small box expansions give you one new boss and then a small deck
Sure.
of cards, and those are $20. So it's like, am I getting double the amount here? Is that why it's 40? I don't get it.
Right.
All the other big box expansions were extra boards and extra stuff to add onto the game. So
Sure.
to me, Eldritch Horror is so much easier to get to the table, especially
Right.
since the wife loves it. It's just she doesn't want to spend 4 hours playing a board game.
Right. I don't blame her. No, I mean like Game of Thrones. Its biggest advantage of how closely it matches the theme is its biggest disadvantage of how. I mean
How close it fits its theme. Because
Yeah.
don't get me wrong, I love me some Game of Thrones. I like the books. I really enjoyed the show until the final season, where I was kind of, some are good episodes, some aren't. You really get involved with those characters, and when you're playing as a group in Game of Thrones, you're like, I love this character. Oh God, I hate this character, but I'm playing this character, so I'm going to play this character right. Like when you're playing as the Lannisters.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. Nope. I couldn't agree more. So Eldritch Horror. Moving on. Sorry, Game of Thrones. Great game, but yeah, it's been done better. All right.
Yeah.
Arkham Horror versus Lord of the Rings.
It's going to be. I kind of know which one's going to go on, but it'd be interesting if we got a H.P. Lovecraft versus H.P. Lovecraft.
It would. It would. I wouldn't mind taking on Lord of the Rings personally, but
I mean, that's fine. You can take it. I'll argue Arkham Horror as best I can, like I did last time.
Yep.
However, I honestly think I know what I would vote for anyways. If we let's just instead of for the first time, instead of debating the brackets, let's just go straight into the thing and explain why I think one of these games is surpassing the other. Just because
okay,
it's kind of hard to do with Arkham Horror.
Then let's jump into matching theme. Which one matches the theme the best?
Lord of the Rings, honestly.
Lord of the Rings, because you're playing out the whole spectrum of Lord of the Rings.
I mean, don't get me wrong. You have the H.P. Lovecraft theme and the lore coming out with Arkham Horror.
Right.
However, with Arkham Horror, I just feel like, especially, and the big argument against Arkham Horror for me is that Eldritch Horror took what Arkham Horror did and made it better.
Yeah.
So the game comes out more in Eldritch Horror. The choices you make come out better in Eldritch Horror.
Right.
And so Lord of the Rings, my only argument against Lord of the Rings, it's supposed to be like a prequel to the Lord of the Rings books themselves. So it's based off the books, but you're making a whole different choices compared to, say, in the books.
Right. The storyline that Lord of the Rings Journey to Middle-earth takes place in is between The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings, the series.
And you have characters that come in Lord of the Rings. You can play as one of the characters. Is it Bilbo you're playing in this one, or is it Frodo?
Bilbo.
So yeah, you're playing the Hobbit character before Lord of the Rings. So it's kind of like they're making their own story. It doesn't really fit like the actual IP itself.
Sure. But how do we feel like the mechanisms match the theme?
I feel like the mechanism comes out more in Lord of the Rings because
Sure.
you're doing the exploration, you're doing the discoveries. Okay, we got to beat this guy up. Oh, he dropped something. Let's go find out where his hideout is because that's what we're supposed to do anyways.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, let's give it to Lord of the Rings then for the matching the theme. I do agree with that.
Which do you think has more meaningful choices?
More meaningful choices. Now that's tricky because it falls in the same category of the last round that we talked about as well, where Lord of the Rings, there's a sense of discovery in it. It's a sense of exploration. You don't know what choices you're going to be doing because they're both cooperative. You're both working together, but one you're given a task that you have to figure out how to do, versus Arkham Horror, you're given the puzzle that you need to know how to solve. With that being said, they're both very similar, but I would have to give it to Arkham, I think, because I feel like the meaning. But I don't remember. Does Arkham have dice?
Yes.
Okay. Arkham does have the random.
Arkham does have the randomness.
And,
like I said, your argument against Eldritch Horror when it comes to the meaningful choices can work for Arkham Horror because it plays a lot of the same. It just opens up the board where you're in the world rather than in Arkham. And you still have the dice play. You still, I think, Eldritch Horror added some ways to mitigate the dice rolling, but it's still all the same stuff, just in the world rather than in Arkham.
Right. Yeah, I don't disagree with that. But then at the same time, Lord of the Rings, you have the skill checks based on the cards that you deal. And
Yeah,
sure, you could gain an advantage to that, but it's essentially the same thing as a dice roll. Not quite. I mean, you can weigh
yeah.
it in your
There's ways to
odds.
mitigate it,
Yeah,
but
but there's ways to mitigate the dice rolls in Arkham as well. So, with that being said, as far as uh, meaningful choices, I'd probably give it to Arkham.
okay.
Yeah.
Art and production.
Um, both. So anyway,
Honestly, though, I would give this one to Lord of the Rings: Journey to Middle Earth, just for the simple fact that
it
you
has
have minis in
minis.
this one, so
Yeah,
you have the plastic, you have better cardboard, you have better. The app integration is just amazing,
that's true.
and the big part of this too, for me, why I give it to Lord of the Rings is because of that app. It
Hmm.
gives you that ambient sound,
Yeah, it gives
so
you
you
the
have that intensity and
aesthetics.
that
Sure.
music in the background.
Now, of course, Arkham Horror Third Edition used an app as well,
Yes.
and so it's
So,
still
but
Fantasy Flight. But
yeah,
yeah, no, I agree with you though. I think it's still Punchboard in the Arkham Horror the board game, whereas it's minis in Lord of the Rings. And even if I think there's some minis in Arkham Horror, it is way more production in Lord of the Rings.
and
So,
no, there is no minis in Arkham Horror. The reason why you see minis on the map is people would take the minis from Mansions of Madness,
oh,
first
okay.
edition, and then put them into Arkham Horror because they liked Arkham Horror better. They just wanted the minis out of Mansions of Madness.
So art and production then Lord of the Rings.
Yep.
Okay.
Replayability.
Replayability. I mean, they're both scenario based. Arkham Horror does not evolve the same way as Lord of the Rings does, though.
Yeah,
Um,
well, for me, like Arkham Horror, yes, it's scenario based, so I can do this, but then if I lose here, I can still go move on to the scenario. If you're playing the campaign style of Lord of the Rings, you have to beat this one to move on through the campaign.
sure. Okay. Yeah.
And that and just because of the campaign aspect, it's more replayable for me,
Yeah.
in my estimation.
And I personally believe it's easier to play than Arkham Horror as well.
Oh yeah,
So
much easier to play because they give you the how to play in the app, so it tells you,
yeah.
okay, you can move your characters here, you could do this. It makes it so much simpler. I'm a visual learner myself, and
Okay.
so seeing how things work through like Watch It Plays or the app itself makes it so much easier for me to pick up.
Okay. All right. Well then, sounds like based on those votes, we are sending on Lord of the Rings: Journeys to Middle Earth, which means our finals that we will be discussing very shortly will be Eldritch Horror versus Lord of the Rings.
Or Fantasy Flight versus Fantasy Flight.
Or Fantasy Flight versus Fantasy Flight. So, by all means, tune in for that. We'd love to hear your input, and we'll be recording that very soon.